years of music in Raleigh. Dreamville organizers have announced a new music festival coming to Dix Park next year.
Surging temperatures followed by storms. I'll show you the record we could break for the first time in more than 30 years. Plus, the biggest threats heading into our weekend.
New tariffs and plunging stocks. What does this mean for your money and investments? We talk live with a local economic expert on what to expect moving forward. Well, it turns out that this year's Dreamville Festival won't be the last one. After all, how about it? Thanks for joining us here at 7 o'clock. I'm Dan Haggerty. So the deal, as you heard right off the top, is to keep this event around for 4 more years. One thing, though, they're not going to be actually calling it Dreamville anymore. They say it'll be under the Dreamville label instead. Monica Casey explains more.
The ink is still drying on the contract, a lot of details being ironed out, but what we know right now, this is a 4-year commitment between Dreamville organizers and the city of Raleigh. Lines are looping around the block for this pop-up Dreamville store days before the music festival kicks off.
I'm waiting for some merch. I want to try to get in on the merch early before everybody gets it at the festival.
That's the kind of excitement the event brought to the city of Oaks.
It's just the energy and the vibe. Everybody that goes is really cool, really awesome. Everything there is it just feels different, you know. It brings a lot of energy to the city.
I think it's great for Raleigh. It brings a lot of people in, and all the businesses, all the restaurants will stay crowded.
Those music fans said it's bittersweet that this is the final year, but their dreams of another festival just became reality. Just hours after the ink on the contract dried, the city of Raleigh and Dreamville organizers announced 4 more years of music.
We're going to be bringing you a new brand in Raleigh, North Carolina.
The details, including the name of the new festival at Dix Park, are still in the works.
So we're going to continue on the same path that's been successful for us. Our consumers have told us what they like, and we're going to try to provide that to them for the next 4 years.
I did ask if J. Cole will be involved in future festivals. The city manager tells me while he may not be headlining, he will still be a part of the process. Reporting in Raleigh, Monica Casey, WRAL News.
All right, there you have it. So the festival is staying. That's great. We still don't know the new name, though. I'm betting they aren't taking suggestions, but when has that ever stopped us? I want to hear what your thoughts are on this. Send me an email, dan@WRAL.com. Normally, we put this up at the end of like an in-depth segment. It's something serious. Typically, this is not. It's a lot simpler. Let's have some fun. I want to know what you think the new Dreamville Festival should be called. Probably won't sway the organizers, but we can have some fun with it. I'm thinking Danville. It's close. You barely have to change the signage. We'll put the most creative ideas up for the Monday mailbag. Kat, it's going to be really hot for Dreamville and everybody else this weekend, like the hottest it's ever been in April hot.
Exactly. I mean, we have not been this hot this early in the year since the year 1990. Believe it or not, that was 35 years ago. Tomorrow, we are forecasting 90 degrees. The summer sizzle is early this year, and that 90 would break records. 90 in Raleigh, 91 in Fayetteville for the high. 90 breaks the previous record of 88 set back in the 1930s, 1934, and we should tie the record again on Saturday with a forecast high of 90. It's hot. It's humid too at Dreamville this weekend, so make sure that you are staying hydrated. There is the opportunity for rain and storms, but most of the festival will be okay. I'll show you the hours that rain could fill in on Sunday coming up.
All right, thank you, Kat. So if you're just getting to the news tonight, let's get you caught up. Here are the 5 things you should know right now. The pair of brothers charged with killing a Wake County Sheriff's deputy will stand trial next year. Alder and Arturo Marin Sotelo are accused of killing Deputy Ned Bird in 2022. That trial date is set right now for September of 2026. St. Augustine's University faces 2 new lawsuits. Both claim the school failed to pay bills to a total of about $18 million. These lawsuits come about a month after more bad news. St. Augustine's accreditation was revoked because it could not prove financial stability and proper oversight. The school is appealing that ruling. Fire crews have made some huge progress on those 2 huge wildfires in western North Carolina. The 2 largest parts of the Black Cove complex fires are now 97% and 79% contained. Firefighters say the cold and wet conditions have really helped as we thought they would. In all, the fires, though, have burned more than 7,000 acres. Part of the funding to expand Marble's Kids Museum, so many people have been excited about this. It's now up in the air a little bit. This is connected to some of those cuts at the federal level, including the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The museum got a grant from that group last year they were intending to use. The museum does say they plan to move some things around and move forward with that plan. The plan for 8,000 new homes in Apex is also still a go. Today, we got a better look at the progress on this $3 billion project. The developer sent some renderings of what it could look like. They also showed us around the construction site a little bit. It will include homes, restaurants, shopping, and pretty much everything else. It could still be about 10 years before the whole thing is finished. Nearly a third of Americans live near the coast, and a new analysis shows that's getting more dangerous. By 2050, more than 2.5 million people could face severe flooding from rising seas. WRAL climate change reporter Liz McLaughlin shows us what that means for North Carolina.
We're already seeing the impacts here in downtown Wilmington. High tide flooding frequently disrupts businesses and roadways.
Rising seas aren't just a future threat, they're already reshaping where and how we live. A new report from Climate Central shows that nearly 1.5 million homes are within the risk zone for a 100-year flood by 2050.
So North Carolina is in the top 10 states with the most people at risk.
Older adults are especially vulnerable. Nationwide, people 65 and older make up nearly a quarter of those at risk. This interactive tool shows where flooding could hit hardest. In some counties, nearly a third of the population is at risk.
It absolutely concerns me. It's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when in many places around our region.
Phil Bresnahan, a marine science researcher and homeowner in New Hanover County, says planning ahead is key.
So I have flood insurance and consider that to be a really important part of living here, and thankfully I'm able to pay for that so that we do have that additional line of defense or protection.
And it's not just coastal residents who will feel the impacts.
One, it impacts the economy of the state, which will have ripple effects, to the west. And two, we have a lot of people from central North Carolina, western North Carolina, and all over. They come to this region for vacations and holidays or have second homes.
The study also highlights ways to reduce the impact of these flooding events, such as building seawalls, restoring wetlands, and raising homes. In Wilmington, I'm Liz McLaughlin, WRAL News.
To add to the last thing she was saying there, though, the report also warns that global climate pledges, like some of those projects, are falling short, meaning that the flood risk could grow even worse in the decades ahead. So maybe you heard there's a few tariff bits back in the news. Possibly you noticed that today. Kind of a big deal, especially on the stock market. It tanked today. But is this short-term pain for long-term gain, or is it something else? We brought in our resident tariff expert to talk about it. Also, tomorrow marks an important step down the road to recovery in North Carolina, in the mountains, a road reopening we want to tell you about. So stick around for tonight's One Last Thing. We're back after this. So Liberation Day has come and passed, and virtually every trade partner with the United States faces at least a 10% tariff on all goods. For many countries, that number is much higher than 10%. Like China, it's now up to 54% because of tariffs earlier this year. The European Union, made up of 27 countries, at 20%. Vietnam, 46%. Japan, 24%. The list goes on. Wall Street, not feeling so great about this. Stocks plunged today. The market combined really haven't had a worse day since June of 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. But President Trump says this is just a temporary setback, and his administration is playing the long game.
We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers.
Now, many economists say lower prices or more jobs. Those things are possible, but in the long run, it could take a while. Again, this is a long game, but in the meantime, it can be a painful game to play because they say prices will likely go up.
We're not talking about weeks or months. We're talking about years. So in that interim time, a lot of people will be facing much higher prices.
All right, so here to help us sort all this out, hopefully you've recognized him now because you've been on here at 7 o'clock a few times. At least figure this out the best we can. This is Scott Lincicome. He's the Vice President of General Economics at the Cato Institute, also a lecturer at Duke University Law School. Great to have you with us here again tonight. So based on what you've seen so far, what do these tariffs mean, both in the short term, as we talk about that, and the long-term play?
So in the short term, like you said, higher prices are all but inevitable. There's only so much in terms of profit margins and domestic availability that allows for the prices at our stores not to go up. So inevitably, you're going to see some amount of price increase, particularly on things like, say, avocados or other things that we just don't make here in the United States. Beyond that, I think you have to be concerned about American manufacturers. You know, about half of everything we import in the United States is stuff used by American manufacturers to make other stuff. And at least in the near term, that with new global tariffs, that means higher costs for manufacturers. So either they pass those costs on to consumers or they eat those costs. And that means less hiring, investment, and output. So that near-term hit's going to be pretty serious.
You know, tariffs, for a lot of people, this is the first time they've heard of them. It's the first time they're really diving into them. They're really not new. I mean, Canada and the EU are really tough on the U.S. dairy industry. There are plenty of them. I don't want to get into the list that was showcased today or the accuracy of it, but we know that tariffs kind of go both ways. And if they're so horrible, if they're so bad, why is anyone tariffing anyone?
Right. So the first thing you have to know is that for developed countries like Canada, Europe, and the United States, generally average tariff rates are very low. You're talking about 2% on average. But every country, including the United States, has politically sensitive industries, dairy, pickup trucks here in the U.S., certain things in Europe, that those are going to get higher tariffs, or they're economically sensitive for security reasons. But those things are certainly worth negotiating over. They're certainly worth the United States complaining about. But in general, these broad-based tariffs to respond to what are really narrow tariff peaks aren't really the best way to do it.
Let's talk about the trade deficit, because that sits kind of at the center of this entire conversation, and it's pretty big. So there's a chart here that shows the largest trade deficits worldwide. If we can, do we have that? Can we pull that up? Well, here we go. So look, that's the United States on the left. Do you notice anything about it? $1.1 trillion. You could stack up all the other countries on this chart, and they still wouldn't be as high as ours. You know, is that a problem that's worth addressing? Because, you know, if the United States is so reliant on imports from other countries, doesn't that put us in a bit of a vulnerable spot? Let's say something catastrophic were to happen on the global stage and we lack the ability to manufacture some essentials. Is that a problem? And is it worth addressing even in maybe an aggressive or extreme way?
Right. So most economists would say that the trade deficit itself is not definitely a problem. It can be a sign, a symptom of underlying problems. But itself is not something that should be fixed by policymakers. But the second big thing is that we have to think about what are we getting for that trade deficit? Because we're getting stuff. And in fact, the United States is the second largest manufacturing nation on the planet. During COVID, supply chains were hit, but we adapted quickly because we had this industrial capacity. And that is actually a testament to having an open economy that's flexible and can adjust. The reason we have a big trade deficit is because we invest more than we save. So this is going to inevitably lead to a trade deficit. But as long as those underlying factors, the amount we're producing, the quality of our economy, the size of our economic output, our GDP, as long as those are good, as long as the economy is open and flexible, then we really shouldn't be obsessed with the trade deficit.
We have used aggressive trade tactics or tariffs in the past. For instance, the Bush steel tariffs in the early 2000s didn't really work out that great. The Reagan tariffs in the 1980s kind of had some mixed results. But I want to focus on one specifically, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930. Of the 1930s, President Trump brings these up a lot. This was right at the start of the Great Depression, raising tariffs on more than 20,000 imported goods. Other countries then responded with some tariffs of their own, and the U.S. exports fell off a cliff. The Depression got worse for a lot of reasons, but that was one of the contributing factors. In 1934, though, the U.S. made some new trade deals that set the tone for decades of trade policy. So here we are 100 years later. Yeah. And we're looking at this scenario. Of course, nobody wants a Great Depression. Nobody wants to even suffer through a recession at this point. But could this be something that sets the stage for a new era of trade that works better for us?
Well, you mentioned Smoot-Hawley. We now have tariff rates after yesterday's announcement that will be higher than the Smoot-Hawley era. And the potential for retaliation and the indirect economic effects are really big. And I think, one of the reasons the stock market was so rattled today is because of those potential indirect economic effects. The question mark is whether this can get us to a better place in the long term. I mean, that's a really big and I think uncertain question. And the reason is because of uncertainty. The fact is that unlike Smoot-Hawley, these tariffs were flipped on like a light switch in the Oval Office. And that means they can be turned off just as easily. Well, investors don't invest based on that kind of uncertainty. You throw in the potential what foreign governments are going to do, the potential for potential trade deals that President Trump talks about he wants to make. And it's just really not an environment that's ripe for this big onshoring move and a stronger domestic investment environment. And that's what really, I think, worries me more than anything. Not just the direct economic hit, but all that uncertainty.
I heard some economists talking today, and of course the market fell, but some were wondering why it didn't even fall further than it did. And some are thinking that this is just so aggressive that people don't think that it could last very long. What's your take on that? Because really, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I think that's the right framing, is that it's hard to say. First, the market has already dropped significantly because a lot of the tariff turmoil was already priced in. The second is the president doesn't have to run for re-election again. So he might not be as concerned about what the stock market is doing if he thinks he's acting in the long term. Now, I think he's mistaken in that long-term play, but I don't think people should be comfortable in assuming this is all going away next week or even next month.
Scott, great to have you with us. Uncertainty is kind of the word of the day. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that when we talk to Kat Campbell because she knows what's going on in the weather world. Kat?
It's going to be hot out there. Check this out, Lake Gaston. This is going to be a place you want to be tomorrow to cool off. Also, look at the pollen that's kind of pooled up right here. So that's maybe not the good part, but it'll be a good weekend to be on the water. The summer sizzle is back way earlier. Average first 90-degree day of the year is May 13th. This year, it's coming on April 4th. It's going to be hot out there. 90 for the high tomorrow. For much of Wake County, it's going to be a hot one and pretty muggy as well. We're going to see the heat last into Dreamville this weekend. Stay hydrated. 90 on Saturday. Bring the sunscreen too. Sunday, 89 degrees. We're going to start the next several days with clouds in the morning and they'll thin during the afternoon, similar to what we've seen recently. Sunday, notice the lightning bolt icon. That wouldn't be until much later in the day. Storm chances start to climb late Sunday night, likely after about 8 p.m. There are still some backs that go on after that, a heads up there. But overall, much of the daytime hours will be dry. Futurecast showing clouds tomorrow morning will be dry during the afternoon likely. There is a front to our north, and that could bring an isolated shower or storm into southern Virginia. They're going to have a tough time crossing the line into North Carolina. But the clouds are back Saturday morning. Not for long. They thin out. It's warm. It'll be breezy on Sunday ahead of this front. It's a warm wind, though, so not really cooling things off too much. 89 for the high on Sunday, and here comes the cold front arriving Sunday night. With it at this point, there could be some storms. However, since this is arriving later at night, the atmosphere shouldn't be quite as energized if these storms arrived midday during the afternoon. So as of right now, the severe weather threat is pretty low with this system, but we'll continue to monitor it. And there is a low-end flooding threat, nothing widespread expected, but it's something worth watching in the coming days with potentially 1 to 2 inches of rain. Plus side to this, it's going to help to wash away our new coating of pollen that developed after Monday's rain. We'll probably have a little bit more after that too. High temperatures near 90 for the next 3 days. We're going to likely break the record tomorrow and tie it Saturday. Next week, a sharp cool down coming our way. 60s for highs. 34 degrees next Wednesday morning. A freeze looking increasingly likely, and that could be of a concern for many.
What a swing. Kat, thank you. A pretty important sign of progress as Western North Carolina recovers from Helene. A major road in Asheville set to reopen 6 months after it washed away. Your one last thing is next. But first, let's get you ready for the weekend. Here's what's going on out and about. One last thing we want to mention tonight, a sign of progress in western North Carolina. Tomorrow, DOT crews will reopen Swannanoa Road in Asheville 6 months after Helene washed it away. The road is named for the river that runs parallel to it. About a 2-mile stretch of road has been closed for 6 months. And this is an important road. It connects Biltmore Village to the other side of 240. Crews basically had to rebuild the entire thing. A new road base, new guardrails, new drainage structures, replacing water lines, cables, traffic signals, and more. It's quite a feat. A lot of people have worked very hard to do this, and the town deserves a win, don't they? The road reopens tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for making WRAL your choice for local news. Our next newscast is at 10 o'clock on Fox 50 and at 11 on WRAL. Have a great night.
Watching WRAL News over the air Channel 34 and Spectrum Channel 1257.